Thomas Alva Edison was born on February 11, 1847, in the small town of Milan, Ohio, a place that at the time held little significance beyond its role as a modest canal port. His family lived in simple conditions, neither wealthy nor destitute, but certainly closer to the struggles of ordinary working households than to the privileges of affluence. His father, Samuel Edison, was a man of restless spirit, constantly searching for opportunities that would allow his family to secure a better future. His mother, Nancy Edison, carried a quiet strength, balancing the household with patience and resilience. From these parents, Thomas inherited both a sense of perseverance and an openness to ideas that transcended the narrow horizons of his early environment. Edison's early childhood was marked by frailty and frequent illness. His health was never robust, and this frailty distinguished him from other boys his age who spent much of their time in outdoor games or hard physical tasks. While other children could chase one another for hours without pause, Thomas often found himself limited by the boundaries set by his body. This condition, however, created a paradoxical advantage. His attention turned inward. He was compelled to seek stimulation not in the endless play of the physical world, but in the quiet depths of his imagination, and the stimulation provided by objects, books, and experiments within reach. The small town of Milan was surrounded by fields, workshops, and modest homes. Life there followed a rhythm tied to seasons and the flow of goods along the canal. For a boy like Thomas, who was naturally restless and curious, the environment might have seemed confining, but even within its limits, he began to notice details others overlooked. He observed how the blacksmith's fire glowed differently depending on the fuel used, or how the mill wheels moved in response to the force of water. Such ordinary sights became sources of fascination, and in his mind, they transformed into questions demanding explanations. Edison's experience with formal schooling was brief and discouraging. When he first entered the local school, his teachers quickly grew frustrated with him. He was slow to absorb lessons in the conventional way, and his inability to sit still for long periods made him appear inattentive or disruptive. His mind was always moving, but not always in the directions expected by the rigid curriculum of mid-19th century education. Teachers concluded that he was incapable of serious study, a judgment that might have doomed him had his mother not intervened. Nancy Edison, a woman of keen intelligence, though lacking in formal education herself, refused to accept the notion that her son was unteachable. She withdrew him from school after only a few months and decided to educate him at home. This decision marked one of the most significant turning points in his life. Instead of forcing him to conform to the rigid patterns of traditional schooling, she allowed him to pursue knowledge in ways that suited his temperament. She introduced him to a variety of books, ranging from simple stories to works of history and science, and encouraged him to read widely. Her trust in his potential instilled in him a sense of confidence that he carried throughout his life. Books became windows through which Edison glimpsed worlds beyond his small town. He devoured histories of great figures, accounts of scientific discoveries, and even works of philosophy. Though his reading was often erratic and self-directed, it fueled a curiosity that no single subject could contain. He learned not simply to absorb information, but to connect ideas, to see how one principle could illuminate another. His mother nurtured this process, guiding without restraining him, and in doing so, she planted the seeds of a lifelong habit of independent learning. Alongside his reading, Edison developed an intense fascination with practical experiments. He was not content merely to read about scientific principles. He wanted to test them with his own hands. The family home soon became filled with evidence of his curiosity. The basement was converted into a small laboratory, cluttered with bottles, jars, and rudimentary equipment. There he conducted experiments with chemicals, often to the alarm of his family when strong odors or minor explosions disrupted the household. These experiments, though primitive, represented the earliest expressions of his inventive spirit. They gave him a sense of mastery over materials and processes, however small, and taught him that understanding came not only from theory, but from practice. This habit of experimentation also revealed a quality that would define him throughout his life: persistence. Many of his early experiments ended in failure. Solutions turned strange colors without explanation, mixtures produced foul smells instead of the desired reactions, and improvised apparatuses collapsed under their own fragility. Yet rather than discouraging him, these failures seemed to invigorate him. Each mistake became a lesson, each setback a step toward greater understanding. For Edison, failure was not an endpoint, but a necessary part of discovery. His natural curiosity extended beyond chemistry into mechanics and electricity, though at the time his understanding was rudimentary. He dismantled objects to see how they worked, from simple toys to household devices, often leaving them in pieces that could not be easily reassembled. His parents sometimes despaired at the destruction, but they also recognized that these acts were not born of malice, but of an insatiable need to know. In these moments, Edison displayed the beginnings of a mind oriented toward invention, a mind that viewed every object not as complete, but as a puzzle waiting to be solved or improved. The community around him offered further opportunities for observation. Milan, though small, was a place where craftsmen, farmers, and laborers practiced a variety of trades. Edison often watched blacksmiths hammering metal, carpenters shaping wood, and millers grinding grain. These processes, carried out with skill and tradition, fascinated him, not for their artistry alone, but for the possibilities they suggested. He wondered how tasks might be made easier, how machines might replace labor, how energy might be harnessed in new ways. Even in childhood, his thoughts turned not only to understanding, but to improvement, not only to knowledge, but to utility. Another element of his early life that shaped his character was the family's financial uncertainty. The Edisons were not destitute, but their means were modest, and Samuel Edison often struggled to maintain steady work. This instability impressed upon young Thomas the importance of resourcefulness and self-reliance. He learned early that opportunities would not be handed to him, they had to be created. This sense of self-sufficiency, combined with his curiosity, made him both independent and ambitious. He did not wait for permission to explore or experiment. Instead, he acted on his own initiative, creating the conditions in which his ideas could take form. Edison's childhood was also shaped by his partial hearing loss, which began at an early age and worsened as he grew older. While many might have viewed this as a handicap, for Edison it became an unexpected advantage. Cut off from some of the distractions of the outside world, he learned to focus deeply on his own thoughts and projects. The diminished ability to hear conversations or noises around him isolated him in some respects, but it also created a private space in which his imagination could flourish without interruption. Later in life, he would remark that his deafness helped him concentrate, but even as a boy, it distinguished him from others and gave him a unique perspective on the world. By the time he reached adolescence, Edison had already formed the habits and qualities that would define his career. He was restless, imaginative, persistent, and deeply practical. His early experiments with chemicals and mechanics had given him a taste of discovery, while his mother's encouragement had instilled confidence in his ability to learn and achieve. He was not yet an inventor in the formal sense, but the path had been set. The boy who struggled in school, who dismantled toys, who filled the family basement with fumes and bottles, was already laying the foundation for the man who would one day transform the modern world. His childhood story was not one of ease or precocious genius, but of struggle,
encouragement, and relentless curiosity. Each difficulty, whether poor health, educational rejection, financial insecurity, or partial hearing loss, became a source of strength rather than weakness. His mother's belief in him provided the emotional anchor he needed, while his own persistence turned obstacles into opportunities. The lessons of these early years prepared him for the challenges to come, for the countless experiments that would fail before one succeeded, for the skepticism of others who doubted his visions, and for the tireless work required to transform imagination into reality. In the quiet town of Milan, far from the centers of power or learning, Thomas Edison began a journey that seemed at first insignificant, the journey of a curious boy with bottles and wires in a basement. But it was in those
As Thomas Edison entered his teenage years, the restless energy and curiosity that had marked his childhood grew into an even stronger drive to explore, create, and push boundaries. The modest household in which he had been raised could no longer contain the expanding scope of his imagination. He longed for independence, for the means to test his ideas beyond the basement laboratory that had been his childhood refuge. In search of both income and adventure, he turned to the railroads, the great arteries of commerce and progress that connected towns and cities across the growing United States. At the age of 12, Edison found employment as a newsboy on the Grand Trunk Railway, selling newspapers, magazines, and candy to passengers traveling between Port Huron and Detroit. For many boys of his age, such work was simply a way to earn money, but for Edison, it became an arena for enterprise and invention. He quickly realized that he could do more than sell the standard papers distributed by publishers. With characteristic initiative, he arranged to obtain early editions of newspapers in bulk and sell them at a profit to passengers eager for the latest news. His instinct for business and his eye for opportunity revealed themselves early, turning what might have been a routine job into a small but thriving enterprise. The railway environment offered Edison more than income. It exposed him to the bustle of commerce, to the energy of industrial expansion, and to a cross-section of American society in motion. He observed passengers of different classes, merchants, businessmen, and travelers of all kinds, each absorbed in the concerns of their age. For Edison, these observations fed his imagination and broadened his understanding of the world beyond his hometown. The railway became both a livelihood and a classroom, providing lessons in business, human behavior, and the importance of speed and communication in a society increasingly driven by information. Yet Edison was not content simply to sell papers and goods. The space of the baggage car, with its relative seclusion, became the site of one of his earliest ventures in independent scientific experimentation. Using the small earnings from his sales, he purchased chemicals, bottles, and simple apparatus, and he set up a laboratory within the train itself. While the other boys might have spent their spare time idling or socializing, Edison transformed the cramped compartment into a miniature workshop. There he carried out chemical experiments, testing reactions, mixing solutions, and attempting to replicate processes he had read about in scientific books. The railway laboratory was emblematic of Edison's character. It was unconventional, improvised, and precarious, yet it reflected his determination to conduct experiments wherever possible. He was unwilling to wait for ideal circumstances or perfect conditions. He created opportunities with whatever space and materials were at hand. In this makeshift setting, surrounded by the constant vibrations and noise of the train, he pursued his fascination with chemistry, often at the risk of alarming conductors and passengers with the odors and occasional small explosions produced by his experiments. In addition to his laboratory, Edison undertook another venture that revealed his entrepreneurial and inventive spirit. He began publishing a newspaper of his own, titled The Grand Trunk Herald.
printed directly on the train with a small press he had acquired. It contained news relevant to railway employees and passengers, including timetables, gossip, and local events. This was no ordinary paper. It was the first newspaper ever printed on a moving train. Edison's idea combined his business acumen with his inventive resourcefulness, and it quickly attracted attention. Though modest in scope, the Herald represented a unique innovation, transforming him from a mere vendor into a publisher and editor. It demonstrated his ability to identify a need, devise a solution, and execute it with ingenuity. Yet the boldness of Edison's experiments sometimes led to misfortune. One day, while conducting chemical tests in his baggage car laboratory, an accident occurred. A container of phosphorus or another volatile substance spilled, igniting a small fire that spread through the compartment. Though quickly extinguished, the incident caused damage to the train car and enraged the conductor. Edison's laboratory was destroyed, and he was reprimanded for endangering the train and its passengers. This setback was a painful reminder of the risks involved in his relentless pursuit of knowledge. But rather than discouraging him, the episode became one more lesson in resilience. He lost his mobile laboratory, but not his enthusiasm. The drive to experiment, to test, and to learn remained unshaken. During his time on the railway, Edison also experienced the incident that would permanently affect his hearing. Accounts differ on whether it was the result of a conductor's blow to the head during the fire incident or from repeated ear infections. But what is certain is that his hearing deteriorated significantly during these years. By his teens, he was already partially deaf, a condition that would worsen throughout his life. Yet, as with so many challenges, Edison reframed this limitation as a peculiar advantage. He found that the relative silence allowed him to concentrate more deeply on his thoughts and work. While others might have been distracted by noise or idle chatter, Edison increasingly lived within the world of his own ideas, where concentration and persistence could flourish. As Edison grew older, his curiosity began to extend beyond chemistry and publishing toward the new frontier of communication, the telegraph. In the mid-19th century, telegraphy represented the cutting edge of technology. Messages that had once taken days to travel by post could now be transmitted instantly over vast distances through electrical signals. For a boy who had already been fascinated by electricity in its simplest forms, the telegraph presented an irresistible allure. It combined the mystery of invisible forces with the practical power to change society. Edison sought every opportunity to learn about telegraphy. His work on the railway provided him with contacts among telegraph operators, and his eagerness to assist them allowed him to observe their methods closely. He absorbed the basics of Morse code, the rhythm of the dots and dashes that translated into words. Soon he was practicing tirelessly, tapping out signals and decoding them with growing speed and accuracy. His persistence paid off, and he acquired a reputation for remarkable proficiency. Becoming a telegraph operator marked a critical transition in Edison's life. No longer confined to selling papers or conducting secret experiments, he entered a profession that placed him at the heart of the communication revolution. Telegraphy required discipline, precision, and technical knowledge, all qualities that he had cultivated in his own way. It also demanded long hours and endurance, as operators often worked through the night to relay messages across the growing network of wires that stitched the nation together. For Edison, this environment was exhilarating. It gave him access to the latest technologies, exposed him to a community of skilled technicians, and provided a foundation for his future as an inventor. His time as a telegraph operator also allowed him to begin tinkering with the devices themselves. Unlike many of his colleagues who were content to master the use of the telegraph, Edison was driven to improve and modify the instruments. He disassembled telegraph equipment to understand its mechanisms, experimented with adjustments, and imagined ways in which efficiency and speed could be increased. These early modifications foreshadowed the inventive genius that would later produce groundbreaking innovations. They also highlighted his unusual perspective. He was not satisfied merely to operate technology, he wanted to reshape it. In these formative years, Edison's daily life was a blend of work, experimentation, and restless ambition. By day, he fulfilled his duties on the railway or at the telegraph office, ensuring that messages flowed without interruption. By night, or in the spare moments between tasks, he immersed himself in experiments, readings, and sketches of ideas. His persistence was legendary even in youth. He seemed never to tire of repetition and trial. Where others would abandon a line of inquiry after failure, Edison pressed forward, convinced that success lay just beyond the next attempt. These teenage experiences provided Edison not merely with technical skills, but they shaped his philosophy of invention and work. He came to believe that progress was not the result of sudden inspiration alone, but of relentless testing, observation, and adaptation. The destruction of his train laboratory taught him resilience. The creation of his own newspaper taught him initiative. The mastery of telegraphy taught him precision and focus. Each event, whether triumph or disaster, added to the foundation of knowledge and character on which his later achievements would rest. By the time Edison reached his late teens, he was no longer merely a boy experimenting in basements or train cars. He was a skilled telegraph operator, a budding inventor, and an ambitious young man determined.
When Thomas Edison moved from small towns to larger cities in search of new opportunities, he carried with him not only the restless curiosity that had defined his childhood, but also a growing body of practical skills acquired during his years as a telegraph operator. The telegraph had become the bloodstream of 19th century communication, linking cities, businesses, and governments in ways that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. For Edison, the work was more than a livelihood. It was an invitation to explore the possibilities of electricity and to test the limits of human ingenuity. Each click and pulse of the telegraph key represented not only information being transferred, but also the hidden potential of a technology that was still in its infancy. He had observed the daily frustrations of telegraph operators, the errors caused by fatigue, the inefficiencies of single-line systems, and the constant demand for greater speed. These problems were not simply inconveniences, they were challenges waiting for a solution. Edison did not see his job as mere routine, he saw it as a laboratory. Each evening, after long shifts spent transmitting messages, he retreated to small rented rooms or makeshift workshops where he could experiment with spare parts, wires, batteries, and bits of machinery scavenged from wherever he could find them. The first notable success of this restless experimentation was his improvement of the telegraph. Traditionally, only one message at a time could travel along a single wire, but businesses and newspapers demanded more capacity. Edison worked tirelessly to create a system that could transmit multiple signals simultaneously. The principle was simple in theory, but complex in execution. It required distinguishing between currents of varying strength and speed so that messages could be encoded in parallel without interfering with one another. Through weeks of trial and error, late nights of sketching circuits, and endless adjustments of coils and relays, he developed a practical method for what became known as the quadruplex telegraph. This invention allowed 4 messages, 2 in each direction, to be sent at the same time over a single wire. The breakthrough was monumental. Railroads, newspapers, and commercial firms immediately recognized the value of such efficiency, and Edison found himself no longer a wandering operator, but an acknowledged inventor. The patents he secured for his telegraphic innovations provided him with his first real income, enough to free him from the daily grind of wage labor and to devote himself to invention as a full-time pursuit. Recognition, however, did not come without its burdens.
Investors and businessmen who saw profit in his designs approached him, offering capital in exchange for rights to his patents. Edison, still young and inexperienced in the complexities of business law, often found himself at a disadvantage in negotiations. While his creativity was undeniable, his understanding of contracts and corporate maneuvering lagged behind. More than once, he accepted terms that gave him only a fraction of the rewards his inventions generated for others. Yet, even in these setbacks, he absorbed valuable lessons. He came to understand that invention was not only about mechanical genius, but also about navigating the sharp world of commerce. His move to establish his own workshop represented a turning point. Renting modest spaces first in Newark and later in other cities, Edison gathered around him a small group of assistants and machinists who could help transform his ideas into working models. These workshops were noisy, cluttered, and alive with the constant hum of experimentation. Machines clicked, sparks crackled, and tables overflowed with fragments of metal, wires, and glass. The air smelled of oil, ozone, and burning insulation. For Edison, such an environment was not chaos, but creation. Every failure, every broken prototype, every late-night experiment that ended in silence rather than success was, to his mind, a step closer to discovery. Among the first lessons he internalized during this period was the value of persistence. Not every invention found a market. Some of his devices, no matter how clever, were too complicated, too expensive, or simply ahead of their time. Investors sometimes turned away, skeptical of his promises. Newspapers occasionally mocked his failures. Yet Edison did not measure progress solely by financial return. To him, a failed experiment was still a piece of knowledge gained, a rung on the ladder toward greater achievement. He began to articulate a philosophy that would later define his public image, that genius was not a sudden flash of inspiration, but rather the accumulation of effort, discipline, and resilience. His experiments extended beyond the telegraph. He dabbled in automatic vote recorders, devices intended to streamline the process of counting ballots in legislatures. Although technically sound, the invention failed to attract buyers because politicians preferred slower methods that allowed them time to negotiate. This disappointment, though frustrating, revealed to Edison a crucial truth. Successful inventions had to align not only with technical possibility, but also with human habits and economic reality. It was not enough to create something new, it had to be something the world was ready to adopt. Despite the setbacks, moments of triumph continued to appear. His telegraph improvements spread widely, and stories of his ingenuity began to circulate among professional circles. He gained a reputation as a man who could solve problems that baffled others, someone whose relentless energy seemed inexhaustible. This reputation drew him into contact with established figures in the world of technology and finance, gradually weaving him into the broader networks of influence that would support his later endeavors. In these early years, Edison's lifestyle mirrored the intensity of his work. He often slept in his workshop, taking brief naps at his workbench before resuming his experiments. Meals were irregular, and his clothes bore stains of chemicals and soot. Friends and colleagues described him as eccentric, but deeply focused, a man who seemed more at ease among wires and gears than in drawing rooms or parlors. Yet beneath the exterior of relentless labor lay a profound confidence in his mission. He believed that electricity was destined to reshape the modern world, and he intended to be at the forefront of that transformation. As his circle of assistants expanded, Edison developed an unusual model of teamwork. While many inventors of his era worked in isolation, jealously guarding their ideas, Edison encouraged collaboration. He delegated tasks, encouraged suggestions, and valued the practical skills of machinists and technicians as much as his own theoretical insights. This approach foreshadowed the invention factories he would later establish, places where invention became a systematic and collective enterprise rather than the solitary pursuit of a lone genius. Recognition also brought personal challenges. Fame drew scrutiny, and not all who encountered him viewed his ambitions favorably. Rivals accused him of exaggeration, of taking credit for the work of others, of being more showman than scientist. Some criticism carried weight, for Edison was not immune to self-promotion. Yet even his critics admitted that his energy was extraordinary, his capacity for work unmatched, and his ability to transform rough ideas into functioning machines undeniable. In the midst of successes and failures alike, Edison refined his sense of identity. No longer merely a curious tinkerer or an iterant operator, he was now an inventor with patents to his name and a growing sense of destiny. Each new device that emerged from his workshop strengthened his conviction that he had found his calling. He was not content simply to repair existing machines. He sought to revolutionize them, to push beyond what others considered possible. The path was not smooth. Financial pressures were constant. At times, despite his growing recognition, he teetered on the edge of bankruptcy. Equipment was expensive, assistants needed wages, and the process of experimentation consumed resources at a relentless pace. Investors demanded results, and when those results lagged, tensions mounted. Yet Edison met these challenges with characteristic resilience. If one avenue of research closed, he opened another. If funds ran low, he sought new backers. Failure to him was never final. It was merely a temporary pause before the next attempt. By the end of this formative period, Edison had achieved what many considered impossible. He had transformed himself from a poorly educated boy of modest origins into a recognized figure in the technological world. His name began to appear in journals, his patents attracted attention, and his workshop became a site of continual innovation. While the inventions of these years did not yet secure him the fame he would later achieve, they laid the essential foundation. They taught him the rhythms of invention, the balance between creativity and practicality, and the necessity of perseverance. The story of his first inventions and recognition was not simply about mechanical achievements. It was about the shaping of character. Edison learned that invention was as much about failure as success, as much about patience as brilliance. He discovered that the world did not always welcome change, that new devices could be resisted as much as embraced. Yet he also proved to himself and to others that persistence could turn ideas into reality, that the vision of one determined individual could ripple outward to touch countless lives. What began with small modifications to telegraphs would eventually expand into realms far beyond communication. But in these early years, every experiment, every patent, and every moment of recognition carved deeper the path he was destined to walk. The boy who once struggled to find his place in school had now found it in the workshop, among sparks and circuits, shaping not only.
The establishment of Thomas Edison's laboratory at Menlo Park marked a decisive turning point, not only in his career but in the broader trajectory of modern invention. Before Menlo Park, inventors were typically solitary figures, working in modest workshops with limited resources, advancing their ideas in isolation. Edison envisioned something radically different. He sought to create a place where invention itself would become industrialized, where the act of discovery would be systematized, and where teams of skilled individuals could contribute to the ceaseless flow of experimentation. This vision transformed a patch of land in rural New Jersey into the world's first true research and development laboratory, a site that would soon be called the Invention Factory. When Edison acquired the property in 1876, it was little more than a modest building surrounded by farmland, yet in his mind it was destined to become a workshop of the future. He poured resources into constructing facilities that could support a wide range of activities: machine shops for metalwork, chemical laboratories for experiments with gases and compounds, rooms for drafting and design, and spaces filled with batteries, wires, and experimental apparatus. The architecture itself was unremarkable, but the atmosphere inside quickly became electric, both literally and figuratively. Edison gathered around him a group of talented assistants, machinists, chemists, and draftsmen. Unlike many inventors who jealously guarded their secrets, he encouraged collaboration and treated invention as a collective process. Each assistant was tasked with exploring specific problems, testing variations, and reporting results. Edison acted as both leader and participant, moving constantly from bench to bench, observing, questioning, sketching ideas, and pushing experiments forward.
The laboratory became a hive of activity, alive with the clatter of tools, the hiss of gas flames, and the buzz of electrical currents. The rhythm of life at Menlo Park reflected Edison's own relentless energy. He was famous for working through the night, often sleeping only a few hours on a cot in the corner of the workshop. Meals were consumed hastily, and conversations were filled with technical debates, speculations, and calculations. His assistants, inspired and sometimes exhausted by his pace, followed his lead. They came to understand that in Edison's laboratory, invention was not a leisurely pursuit, but a disciplined and demanding endeavor. Yet the environment was also one of excitement. Each day promised the possibility of breakthrough. Each experiment carried the potential to reshape the future. One of the earliest and most astonishing successes to emerge from Menlo Park was the phonograph. Edison's interest in sound recording grew from his work on telegraphy and telephony, where he had become fascinated with the possibility of capturing and reproducing vibrations. In 1877, he devised a system in which sound waves were channeled through a diaphragm attached to a stylus, which inscribed grooves onto a rotating cylinder covered with tinfoil. When the cylinder was turned and the stylus retraced the grooves, the diaphragm vibrated again, reproducing the original sound. The first words he recorded, "Mary had a little lamb," seemed almost magical when played back. The phonograph astonished the public and scientific community alike. Newspapers hailed it as a wonder of the age, calling Edison the Wizard of Menlo Park. For the first time in history, human voices and music could be preserved and replayed, defying the fleeting nature of sound. The device opened new possibilities for communication, entertainment, and education. Although its early versions were crude and commercially limited, the phonograph symbolized the power of Edison's laboratory and his ability to transform abstract ideas into tangible marvels. Even as the excitement over the phonograph spread, Edison was already turning his attention to an even more ambitious challenge: the creation of a practical electric light. The dream of electric illumination had haunted inventors for decades. Arc lamps existed, but they were too bright and impractical for household use. The challenge was to produce a steady, affordable, and safe source of light that could replace gas lamps and candles in homes, streets, and workplaces. Edison approached the problem with characteristic determination. He believed that the key lay in developing a filament that could glow brightly when heated by electricity, but would not burn out too quickly. His laboratory embarked on an exhaustive search for the right materials. Filaments made of platinum, carbonized paper, bamboo, and countless other substances were tested. Each experiment was carefully recorded, each failure analyzed, each slight improvement pursued. Edison was not content with partial success. He sought a solution that would be practical for everyday life. The breakthrough came in 1879 when his team produced a carbon filament lamp that could burn for over 40 hours. This achievement proved that electric light could be reliable and durable. Further refinements soon extended the lifespan of the bulbs, and Edison began to envision not only individual lamps, but entire systems of electrical distribution. He understood that the light bulb alone would not transform society. What was needed was a complete infrastructure of generators, wiring, switches, and meters. Menlo Park thus became the birthplace not only of the lamp, but of the modern electric grid. The invention of the electric light captured the imagination of the world. Demonstrations at Menlo Park attracted visitors from near and far who marveled at rooms illuminated by the steady, soft glow of electric bulbs. Newspapers published glowing accounts, and Edison's name became synonymous with progress. He was no longer simply an inventor of clever devices, he was now a symbol of the dawning electrical age. The laboratory did not rest on these achievements. Scores of other inventions emerged during this period. Improvements to the telephone, innovations in telegraphy, experiments with storage batteries, and countless small devices that demonstrated the breadth of Edison's curiosity. Each project reflected his philosophy that invention should serve practical needs. He did not pursue discoveries for their own sake, but sought to integrate them into daily life, to make them accessible and useful to the widest possible audience. Edison's work ethic became legendary. He was known to say that genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, a phrase that encapsulated his belief in relentless effort. At Menlo Park, perspiration was abundant. Experiments often ran through the night, with assistants collapsing from fatigue while Edison continued to test variations and record results. His notebooks filled with thousands of sketches, calculations, and observations. Each page bore witness to the systematic pursuit of solutions, the willingness to try every conceivable approach until success was achieved. The culture of Menlo Park reflected both the strengths and the challenges of Edison's leadership. On one hand, the collaborative environment encouraged creativity and produced remarkable results. On the other hand, the demands of the work could be overwhelming, and not all assistants thrived under the pressure. Yet despite occasional tensions, the laboratory maintained a sense of purpose that united its members. They knew they were part of something unprecedented, a new model of innovation that would inspire generations to come. The fame of Menlo Park spread rapidly. Journalists flocked to the laboratory, eager to report on the marvels being created. Visitors included scientists, businessmen, and political leaders, all curious to witness the birthplace of modern invention. Edison became a public figure, celebrated not only for his devices, but for his persona as the tireless wizard who conjured wonders from wires and glass. The image was not entirely accurate, much of the work was collective, and many ideas required years of refinement, but it captured the imagination of the public and solidified his reputation. Beyond the specific inventions, Menlo Park represented a profound shift in the culture of science and technology. It demonstrated that innovation could be organized, that research could be conducted systematically, and that teams of individuals could collectively advance knowledge. The laboratory became a prototype for the research institutions that would dominate the 20th century, from corporate R&D centers to university laboratories. Edison himself remained the driving force. His confidence, energy, and vision inspired those around him. He believed that no problem was insurmountable, that persistence would eventually yield solutions, and that invention could improve the human condition. This belief infused every corner of Menlo Park and gave its work a sense of mission. By the time the laboratory reached its peak, it had produced more than 400 patents. Each one represented not just a technical achievement, but a step in the transformation of modern life. The phonograph gave voice to memory, the electric light banished darkness, and countless other devices enhanced communication, industry, and comfort. Menlo Park had become a beacon of progress, a place where the future seemed to arrive daily. The legacy of Menlo Park was not only in the inventions themselves, but in the idea that invention could be organized, scaled, and directed toward the practical needs of society. Edison had transformed the role of the inventor from that of a solitary genius to that of a leader of teams, a manager of processes, and a creator of systems. This shift would shape the evolution of modern industry and science, influencing how research was conducted for generations to come. For Edison personally, the years at Menlo Park were the most creative and transformative of his life. They established his reputation, secured his place in history, and demonstrated the power of his philosophy of invention. The laboratory became not only a physical place, but a symbol of the new age of electricity and industrial innovation. It was here that Edison truly became the Wizard of Menlo Park, and it was here that he proved that imagination, combined with discipline and...
By the final decades of the 19th century, Thomas Edison found himself at the center of one of the most dramatic technological conflicts of the modern age, a struggle that became known as the War of Currents. At its heart was a fundamental question about the future of electricity. Would society embrace Edison's system of direct current, or would it turn toward the alternating current championed by Nikola Tesla and George Westinghouse? This conflict was not only a matter of engineering, but of influence, prestige, economics, and the very identity of modern progress. It transformed Edison from an inventor working in his laboratory into a public figure locked in a contest that would determine how electricity reached the homes, factories, and streets of the world. Edison had built his early reputation on the development of practical incandescent lighting and the system that supported it. His vision had never been limited to the light bulb itself, but had always encompassed the complete infrastructure required to distribute power safely and reliably. By 1882, he had unveiled the Pearl Street Station in New York City, one of the first central power stations in the world. This facility supplied direct current electricity to a limited area of Lower Manhattan, illuminating businesses and homes with a steadiness that astonished those who had relied on gas lamps. For Edison, this was proof of concept, a demonstration that electricity could be generated, transmitted, and consumed on a commercial scale. The system, however, had limitations. Direct current could not easily be transmitted over long distances without significant loss of power. To supply electricity beyond a radius of a mile or two from the generation station, expensive and cumbersome infrastructure would be required, including numerous stations positioned close to consumers. Edison, convinced of the reliability and safety of his system, believed that these limitations could be overcome with more efficient wiring, better conductors, and improved generation methods. He placed his faith in incremental improvement rather than radical change. Meanwhile, alternating current offered an alternative solution. Pioneered by inventors and engineers such as Nikola Tesla and brought into commercial reality through the efforts of George Westinghouse, alternating current could be transmitted over great distances with relative efficiency. By using transformers, the voltage could be increased for long-distance transmission and then reduced for safe use in homes and businesses. This flexibility meant that large, centralized generating plants could serve entire cities and regions rather than just neighborhoods. Technically, alternating current seemed to offer undeniable advantages, but for Edison, it represented both a professional challenge and a personal affront. Edison had invested not only his reputation, but also vast financial resources into the development of direct current systems. His companies, investors, and clients had all committed to the infrastructure he had created. To concede the superiority of alternating current would mean undermining his own accomplishments and weakening the commercial empire he had built. More deeply, Edison truly believed that alternating current was unsafe. The high voltages used in AC systems carried greater risks of shock and electrocution. He viewed these dangers as intolerable in a technology meant to become a ubiquitous part of everyday life. In his mind, safety was paramount, and direct current, though more limited, was inherently less hazardous. Thus began the War of Currents, a campaign of rivalry that was waged not only in laboratories and boardrooms, but also in newspapers, public demonstrations, and courtrooms. Edison used his influence to warn of the dangers of alternating current. He pointed to accidents, some fatal, that occurred when poorly managed AC systems were installed in growing cities. These incidents, while sometimes exaggerated in the press, gave weight to his arguments. Edison's companies circulated pamphlets and reports that emphasized the risks of alternating current, painting it as a reckless gamble with public safety. The conflict escalated further when the question of capital punishment entered the debate. In the late 1880s, the state of New York sought a more humane method of execution than hanging. Edison, though personally opposed to the death penalty, saw an opportunity to illustrate the dangers of alternating current. He suggested, indirectly through associates, that AC could be employed for this purpose. The adoption of the electric chair, powered by alternating current, created a powerful association between AC and death in the public imagination. Demonstrations were even conducted in which animals were electrocuted with alternating current to prove its lethality. These spectacles, while shocking, also deepened the controversy surrounding Edison's tactics. Critics accused him of resorting to fear-mongering and sensationalism, while supporters argued that he was protecting the public from a dangerous technology. At the same time, Westinghouse and Tesla pressed forward with their vision of an AC-powered future. Tesla, with his deep understanding of electrical theory and his imaginative genius, developed systems of polyphase alternating current and advanced transformer designs that made AC more efficient and versatile. Westinghouse, with his business acumen and resources, worked to commercialize these systems, installing power plants and lighting systems that demonstrated their practical superiority. Together, they represented a formidable challenge to Edison's dominance. The rivalry reached a symbolic climax with the contract to provide power for the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Westinghouse and Tesla secured the contract, offering to illuminate the fair with alternating current at a fraction of the cost proposed by Edison's companies. The sight of thousands of electric lamps powered by AC dazzled millions of visitors and provided a dramatic demonstration of its capabilities. For many, the exposition marked the moment when alternating current triumphed in the public eye. Edison, by this time, found his position increasingly precarious. Though he continued to promote direct current, the economic and practical advantages of AC were becoming impossible to ignore. Investors and industrialists saw the potential of long-distance transmission and the scalability of alternating current systems. By the mid-1900s, the momentum had shifted decisively in favor of AC. Edison's own companies, under pressure from financiers like J.P. Morgan, eventually began to adopt alternating current technologies, effectively conceding the battle. The war of currents left Edison with mixed legacies. On the one hand, he had fought with passion and conviction, defending what he believed to be the safer and more responsible technology. On the other hand, his methods during the conflict, particularly the use of public fear and association of AC with death, damaged his reputation among some contemporaries. Yet even in defeat, his influence remained profound. He had built the first real electrical infrastructure, proven the commercial viability of electric lighting, and inspired the public with the possibilities of a world illuminated by electricity. The struggle also revealed deeper truths about Edison's character and philosophy. He was a pragmatist who valued tangible results over abstract theories. Tesla, in contrast, embodied the visionary scientist, dreaming of systems that extended far beyond the immediate present. Westinghouse brought the financial and managerial stability that ensured those dreams could become practical realities. Edison's insistence on direct current may have seemed short-sighted in retrospect, but it was also consistent with his broader commitment to safety and reliability. Despite losing the battle, Edison's contributions to the electrification of society were indispensable. The distribution networks he pioneered, the generators he developed, and the practical devices he created laid the foundation for the systems that ultimately adopted alternating current. His insistence on standardization, safety measures, and the integration of technology into everyday life ensured that electricity could be more than a novelty, it could become a necessity. In the years that followed, as alternating current spread across cities and nations, Edison turned his attention to other fields, but the impact of the war of currents lingered. It became a defining episode in his life, a moment when his ambitions and convictions collided with those of equally determined rivals. The story of that conflict illustrated the dynamic nature of technological progress, in which competing ideas, personalities, and business interests clashed to shape the modern world. For Edison personally, the war of currents was both a trial and a testament. It tested his resilience, challenged his assumptions, and forced him to confront the limits of his influence. Though he did not emerge victorious, he remained a central figure in the narrative of electricity. His name continued to be synonymous with innovation, and his role as a pioneer of the electrical age was secure. By the close of the 19th century, Edison stood as a symbol of both the possibilities and the complexities of technological progress. His direct current systems had been overtaken by alternating current, but the dream of an electrified world that he had championed had become a reality. Streets glowed with electric lamps, factories hummed with electrically powered machinery, and homes were transformed by the new convenience of electric light. The war of currents, though bitter, accelerated the pace of change and underscored the transformative power of invention. Edison's influence extended far beyond the technical details of the conflict. He had helped to shape the public perception of electricity, to bring it from the realm of novelty into the fabric of daily life. His persistence, his ability to rally investors and workers, and his gift for capturing the imagination of the public ensured that his legacy endured. Even as alternating current became the standard, the infrastructure and momentum that Edison had created continued to support its growth. In the end, the war of currents was not simply a story of victory or defeat. It was a chapter in the larger narrative of industrial civilization, a moment when the direction of progress was contested and defined. Edison's role in that struggle demonstrated both his strengths and his flaws, his brilliance as an inventor and his stubbornness as a businessman. Yet he also affirmed his place in history as a central figure in the electrification of the world.
As the 20th century unfolded,
Thomas Edison entered the final phase of his long and remarkable life. Though advancing age brought physical decline and recurring health issues, his mind remained unrelentingly active, and his days continued to be shaped by a restless curiosity that had defined him since boyhood. He never ceased working on new ideas, never abandoned the belief that the world could be improved through persistent invention, and never relinquished his role as a figure who symbolized progress to millions of people. His later years revealed both the resilience of his character and the depth of his influence on modern civilization. By the 1900s, Edison was already an established legend, a man whose name was synonymous with invention. He had secured more than 1,000 patents and had given the world the phonograph, practical incandescent lighting, and motion picture technology. Yet he refused to rest on these triumphs. Instead, he pursued new projects with the same energy that had fueled his youth. One of his chief interests became the development of improved storage batteries. He envisioned a world in which electricity could be harnessed not only for stationary lighting and machinery, but also for transportation and portable uses. His experiments with nickel-iron alkaline batteries consumed years of research and millions of dollars. The technology promised greater durability than existing lead-acid batteries, and Edison imagined its use in electric vehicles, submarines, and railway systems. Though his battery did not revolutionize the automobile industry as he had once hoped, gasoline engines soon dominated transportation, it still found important applications, particularly in industrial uses and naval equipment. More than the practical outcome, the project reflected Edison's determination to look forward rather than backward, to continue seeking improvements even when the world already celebrated him as a finished monument of invention. Alongside his work with batteries, Edison also devoted attention to perfecting the phonograph. This invention, which he had originally introduced in 1877, had undergone numerous refinements over the decades. By the early 20th century, it had become both a commercial product and a cultural force. Edison took personal interest in improving the sound quality, exploring better recording techniques, and experimenting with new materials for records. His laboratories worked tirelessly on methods to capture voices and music with greater fidelity. To Edison, the phonograph was not merely a machine, but a bridge between memory and permanence, a way to preserve moments of sound for generations. He considered it one of his most personal achievements, a device that carried emotional as well as technical significance. His engagement with motion pictures also continued. Though others, such as the Lumiere brothers and later the pioneers of Hollywood, took the technology into new artistic and commercial directions, Edison never entirely withdrew from the field. He had helped establish the foundations of moving image projection and recording, and in his later years, he monitored its growth with a mixture of pride and rivalry. He licensed technologies, defended patents, and occasionally returned to the problem of improving the quality of film and projection. To him, motion pictures, like the phonograph, represented a democratization of experience, bringing stories, images, and knowledge to wide audiences in ways previously unimaginable. Despite these ongoing endeavors, the realities of age began to intrude. Edison, who had once worked through nights on end with only a few hours of rest, increasingly found his strength limited. His hearing, damaged long ago, worsened, making communication more difficult. His energy fluctuated, and long sessions in the laboratory became rarer. Yet even as his physical capacity diminished, his authority as a symbol of invention only grew. Newspapers covered his opinions on technology, progress, and society. School children learned his story as a parable of perseverance. Politicians and business leaders sought his endorsement.
Edison had become more than an inventor. He was an institution, a living representation of the American belief in self-made success. In 1914, a fire swept through much of Edison's laboratory complex in West Orange, New Jersey. Dozens of buildings burned, destroying valuable records, prototypes, and equipment. For many, such a disaster might have signaled the end of a career. Edison, however, faced it with characteristic resolve. He reportedly returned to work almost immediately, vowing to rebuild and continue. The incident became emblematic of his resilience, reinforcing the image of Edison as a man who refused to be defeated by setbacks, whether technical, financial, or personal. During the First World War, Edison offered his services to the United States government. He believed that scientists and inventors had a duty to contribute to national defense. He worked on projects related to naval technology, including submarine detection systems and improved weaponry. Though not all his efforts produced practical results, his commitment to applying his skills to the needs of the nation further elevated his status as a patriotic figure. His involvement also demonstrated his continuing relevance at a time when many of his contemporaries had retired or faded from public view. The 1920s brought new challenges, but also renewed recognition. As radio emerged as a powerful medium, Edison observed its rise with interest. He appreciated its potential for communication and entertainment, but also felt the sense of competition, for it overshadowed the phonograph in some ways. Still, he adapted, experimenting with ways to combine the phonograph with radio receivers. His ability to acknowledge new directions while holding on to older inventions reflected both his adaptability and his reluctance to let go of the creations that had defined his life. In these years, Edison also engaged in partnerships and public appearances that further cemented his legendary status. He was frequently photographed with industrial leaders such as Henry Ford and Harvey Firestone. Together, they represented the spirit of American enterprise and innovation. Ford, in particular, admired Edison deeply, considering him a mentor and friend. The two men, along with Firestone, often traveled together, embarking on camping trips that drew media attention. These excursions, blending camaraderie and publicity, created enduring images of Edison as not only a scientific genius, but also a public personality comfortable among the titans of industry. As he grew older, Edison's health declined more noticeably. He suffered from diabetes, stomach problems, and the cumulative effects of decades of relentless labor. But he remained active in his laboratories, dictating instructions, reviewing experiments, and engaging with younger engineers and scientists. His determination to remain involved, even when his body faltered, underscored the depth of his identity as an inventor. For Edison, to stop creating was to stop living. By the late 1920s, Edison had become something of a national elder statesman. He received honors, awards, and tributes from institutions around the world. In 1929, the 50th anniversary of the electric light was commemorated with great ceremony. At an event attended by President Herbert Hoover, Edison reenacted the moment of switching on his original incandescent lamp. The celebration, broadcast over radio, reminded millions of listeners of his role in shaping the modern world. It was a moment of recognition not only for Edison himself, but for the entire era of industrial transformation he represented. In his final years, Edison spent more time at home with his family, though his laboratory remained a constant presence. His wife Mina provided care and companionship, and his children managed many aspects of his estate and business affairs. The image of Edison in old age, surrounded by family, yet still immersed in thought, reflected the dual nature of his life: private man and public icon, husband and father, as well as inventor and symbol. Edison's last months were marked by frailty, but also by dignity. He knew that his health was failing, but he faced the end with the same steadiness that had carried him through countless trials. On October 18, 1931, Thomas Edison died at his home in West Orange, New Jersey. His passing was mourned across the nation and around the world. Newspapers printed lengthy obituaries, recounting his inventions, his struggles, and his triumphs. Leaders, scientists, and ordinary citizens paid tribute to the man who had given light to the darkness and sound to silence. In a symbolic gesture, communities across the United States briefly dimmed their electric lights on the evening of his funeral. This act of collective remembrance underscored the degree to which Edison's legacy had become woven into everyday